The ice in my glass was melting, but the chilling realization that hit me that night was something no heat could ever thaw. They didn't invite 50 people, all our closest, friends and family, to celebrate the day. I turned 25. They invited them to witness my execution. It wasn't the shouted words of anger that broke me. It was the quiet, cold finality in my father's eyes as he tore up my inheritance, piece by piece, right there on the mahogany table. In that moment, watching the faces of the people who were supposed to love me turn into a jury of judgmental strangers, I knew my life would never be the same again. My name is Noah. For most of my life, that name came with an invisible heavy asterisk, Noah, the only child of the esteemed Arthur and Victoria Vance. My parents weren't just wealthy. They were a legacy. They built Vance and Associates, a real estate empire that dominated the skyline of the entire city. My father, Arthur, was a man who believed in order, hierarchy, and tradition above all else. He was a pillar of the community, known for his stern integrity and his absolute intolerance for anything that he deemed a waste of potential. My mother, Victoria, was the iron fist in the velvet glove, the social architect who managed their reputation, always ensuring the family looked flawless, even if it meant burying the truth deep beneath the manicured lawns. From the moment I could walk, my life was mapped out. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a mandate. Attend the right schools, major in business, intern at Vance and Associates, marry a suitable girl from a family of equal standing, and one day, assume my rightful place as CEO. This was the destiny they had forged for me, the golden chain they had placed around my neck before I even had the chance to choose. I was the heir apparent, the crown prince of the Vance kingdom, and the stakes in my parents' eyes were the entirety of the family name. If I succeeded, they were validated. If I failed, their world would collapse. The primary conflict wasn't about money. It was about freedom. I didn't want the empire. I didn't want the quarterly reports, the golf course networking, or the stifling, perpetual performance of being Arthur Vance's son. What I truly loved, what filled my soul, was wildlife photography. I dreamed of traveling the world, capturing the raw, untamed beauty of nature, of showing people the magnificent, fragile world outside the boardroom windows. I had been nurturing this secret passion since I was a teenager, using the vastness of my allowance to buy professional equipment and taking clandestine trips to national parks, always under the guise of school research. The main antagonist, besides my parents' suffocating expectations, was my father's business partner, Julian Hayes. Julian was an opportunist, a slick, impeccably dressed man who had always coveted my father's position. He had a son, Thomas, who was everything I wasn't, ruthless, ambitious, and utterly devoted to the corporate grind. Julian subtly, constantly pitted Thomas against me, always reminding my father how unfocused I was, how unsuited I was to carry the family torch compared to his own fiercely dedicated son. Julian was the serpent in the garden, and I was the obstacle he needed removed. My greatest ally, perhaps the only one, was my younger cousin Clara. She was a fiery, artistic soul who understood my need to escape. Clara was the one who helped me maintain my cover stories, who accepted my occasional frantic calls from remote locations, and who always reminded me that a life lived under someone else's terms is no life at all. She was the only person within the family circle who knew the truth, that I had secretly built a modest but promising portfolio, and that I was planning to finally step away from the business world to pursue photography full-time. The immediate crisis leading up to my birthday dinner was simple. My father had given me an ultimatum. My 25th birthday was the deadline. I was expected to sign the final, binding legal documents that would officially transfer the majority shares of Vance and Associates into my name, solidifying my path as the next CEO. That meant ending my secret life, giving up my camera and accepting the golden cage. But I couldn't do it. A week before the dinner, I had discreetly taken an immense life-changing step. A world-renowned nature conservation organization had reviewed my portfolio and offered me a 2-year, fully funded contract to document endangered species in the Amazon. It was my dream realized, my ticket to freedom, and I had accepted it, knowing that signing it meant I was signing my own death warrant in the eyes of my parents. The documents were already signed, sealed, and waiting for me to leave. My birthday dinner was supposed to be a double celebration, my quarter-century mark, and the official public crowning of the heir. It was meant to be my final surrender. The atmosphere in the weeks leading up to the dinner was thick with a false sense of peace, the kind that precedes a violent storm. My parents were unusually affectionate, a saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl. They spoke of the future, my future, as they defined it in glowing, confident terms. "You will be a force, Noah," my father would boom over breakfast. "The legacy is yours to carry." My mother, Victoria had begun a flurry of social activity, leaking details of the imminent succession to the society pages, strategically setting the stage for my big moment. But beneath the surface, the cracks were showing. One afternoon, my father found a remote storage drive that I thought I had hidden perfectly. It contained a few hundred high-resolution photos of my last trip, a series of stunning, almost spiritual images of the Siberian tiger. He just placed the drive on my desk, his face a mask of disappointment so profound it was worse than anger. Is this what I've spent 25 years preparing you for, Noah? Chasing ghosts in the snow? This hobby ends now. Tonight you sign the papers. You become a man. The implicit threat was clear: comply, or suffer the consequences. The tension was also being amplified by Julian Hayes and his son Thomas. Thomas had been shadowing me at the firm, supposedly learning the ropes, but in reality he was a spy. He'd accidentally point out minor flaws in my reports, always within earshot of my father, planting seeds of doubt. Noah's a dreamer, Mr. Vance, I overheard him telling my father one day. He doesn't have the stomach for the dirty work. He doesn't have the commitment. The subtle digs were like dripping water eroding. A stone, slowly convincing my father that I was not worthy of the throne, that the empire would be safer in other, more ruthless hands, namely Thomas's. The final straw, the detail that would ignite the explosion, came 2 days before my birthday. I had been careless. My Amazon contract, which I needed to submit immediately, required a signature confirming my severance from my current employment. To facilitate this, I had drafted a simple, but legally sound, letter of resignation from Vance and Associates. I was so careful, but I left a printed copy inside a folder marked Future Correspondence. My mother, in her meticulous preparation for the dinner, came across it while sorting through my study to prepare for the new executive office I was supposed to occupy. I was out at the time, picking up my last remaining personal items from the city apartment I was vacating. When I returned, the house was silent, but the air felt charged. My mother was standing in the center of my study, the resignation letter clutched in her hand. Her composure was terrifying. You were going to run, Noah, on your 25th birthday, the day we planned to give you everything. You were planning to abandon us for pictures of dirty animals? She didn't raise her voice. She spoke with a chilling, surgical precision. We have worked too hard, Noah. You will not humiliate us. You will smile tonight. You will sign the papers. And you will tell me that this betrayal was a moment of weakness that you regret. I looked at the resignation letter. I looked at the photograph of the Siberian tiger on my screensaver. I saw my whole life stretched out before me. One path was a gilded cage. The other was an uncertain, dangerous but utterly free world. I don't regret it, Mother, I finally said, my voice shaking but firm. It's not a weakness. It's my life, and I will not sign those papers. That was the moment the veil dropped. Her face hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Then you leave me no choice, Noah, she whispered, her eyes flashing with a coldness that true. Let's see how much your freedom costs you. I understood then why the dinner had grown from a modest family affair into a lavish event for 50 of the city's most influential people. They weren't just celebrating. They were setting the stage for a public performance, a deliberate act of profound humiliation. The grand dinner, the sparkling crystal, the perfectly arranged flowers. It was all a meticulously crafted altar on which they planned to sacrifice my identity, and failing that, my very place in the family. The rising action was complete. The clock was ticking down to the final, devastating moment of truth. The ballroom of the Grand Hyatt was blindingly bright. It was a suffocating sea of black ties, glittering jewels, and the nauseating scent of money and expensive perfume. My parents had outdone themselves. 50 guests, the city's elite, were seated at a long, opulent table. Everyone smiled, sipping champagne, but there was an undertone of palpable tension, a strange, expectant hush whenever my father cleared his throat. I, Noah, sat at the head of the table, feeling like a trapped exhibit. I exchanged a glance with Clara, my cousin, who was seated far down the table, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod, a silent prayer. The dinner was a blur of forced compliments and hollow toasts. Then, after the dessert course, a spectacular, multi-tiered confection, my father stood up. He didn't reach for the champagne flute. He reached for a heavy silver gavel. The room went absolutely silent. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur Vance began, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who commanded the attention of everyone in the room. Tonight is a momentous occasion. We celebrate my son Noah's 25th birthday. But more importantly, tonight we celebrate the future of Vance and Associates. He gestured to a leather-bound folio placed next to my plate. These documents, my friends, represent the transfer of ownership, the culmination of 2 decades of preparation, and the official anointing of Noah as my successor. The cameras flashed. The applause began, a wave of congratulatory sound. My father looked at me, his eyes cold and unwavering. "Come now, son. Sign the papers. Do your duty. Fulfill your promise." It was the moment. The room felt like it was shrinking. The air was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic caged bird. Julian Hayes and his son Thomas were watching from the side, their smiles predatory. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes burning into me, all expecting the inevitable, the compliance. Then I looked away from the signature line. I didn't see the business name. I saw the Siberian tiger, the Amazon jungle, the freedom I had already claimed. The camera bag I had hidden in the trunk of my car suddenly felt heavier, more real than the inheritance folio in front of me. I placed the pen down, not gently, but with a deliberate, audible clack against the marble. "I won't sign," I said. My voice was raspy, but it cut through the silence like glass. The reaction was immediate and seismic. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her face pale with shock and fury. My father's composure cracked. His jaw tightened, and the vein in his temple throbbed violently. "What did you say, Noah?" he demanded, his voice low, dangerous. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I forced myself to stand tall. I said I won't sign. I don't want Vance and Associates. I don't want the legacy, the title, or the life you planned for me. I'm not a businessman, Father. I'm a photographer, and I have already accepted a 2-year contract to work in the Amazon. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled resignation letter I had retrieved. I threw it onto the table, landing near the prestigious ownership documents. "I resigned from your firm 2 days ago. I am leaving tomorrow." The sheer audacity of the public refusal was what broke my father. He didn't shout. He just let out a choked, desperate sound. Julian Hayes, seeing his opportunity, stepped forward, a smug look of vindication on his face. "Arthur, I told you the boy was a liability," Julian sneered. Loud enough for the table to hear. "He has no respect for the name. He is throwing away everything." My father turned to the 50 guests, his face a horrifying mask of wounded pride and betrayal. "You all heard him," he announced, his voice regaining its terrifying authority. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "Then you are no son of mine. You want your freedom? You can have it. You walk out of this room tonight with nothing but the clothes on your back and the delusion in your head. You are disinherited. You are disowned. You are dead to the Vance family name." He then looked at his lawyer, who was standing nearby, rigid with shock. "Call my attorney first thing. Draft the documents. Noah Vance is no more. Every account, every trust, every policy bearing his name is to be revoked and reassigned." This was the climax, the absolute brutal public execution of my identity. In that instant, I was stripped bare. I looked at my mother, who turned her back on me, unable to face the disgrace. The guests were murmuring, a chorus of judgment. The air was thick with the stench of social ruin, but in the split second before the shame could consume me, I made the decision that changed everything. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I didn't try to defend myself. I smiled, a genuine, small, defiant smile. I looked directly at my father, and I spoke the only truth that mattered. "Noah Vance is no more. You are right, but Noah, the man, is finally free." I reached into my bag I had brought, pulled out a small professional camera, and took a flash photo of the whole stunned dinner party. I captured the moment of their judgment, the perfect shot of their cold betrayal. Then I turned my back on the grand table, on the inheritance, on the name, and on the $75 million life I was supposed to lead. I walked straight through the murmuring crowd, past Julian's smirk and out the heavy oak doors. I was poorer than I had ever been, but I felt richer than the entire Vance empire. The immediate consequence of my decision was total, absolute silence. My father's actions ensured a complete financial and social blackout. The next morning, every credit card was declined. My personal savings account was frozen. It turned out most of the funds were technically in a joint trust. The beautiful apartment I thought was mine was immediately listed for sale. I was instantly homeless, penniless, and nameless in the world my parents controlled. I drove my beat-up sedan, the only vehicle that was fully in my name and not leased by the firm, to Clara's apartment. She was the first person I called. When I arrived, she hugged me, tears streaming down her face. Not for the money I had lost, but for the courage I had found. "You actually did it, Noah," she whispered. "You burned the bridge and walked away." The family reacted predictably. My mother immediately began a vicious campaign of damage control. She told the press, who were already circling like vultures, that I was having a mental health crisis, that I was temporarily disoriented, and that the entire inheritance would be put on hold until I regained my senses. Julian Hayes predictably saw his opening. Within a week, my father, Distraught and publicly humiliated, appointed Thomas Hayes as the interim CEO, a move Julian had orchestrated for years. The empire had changed hands, just not in the way Arthur Vance ever intended. My cousins and extended family split into two camps, the vast majority who sided with my parents, viewing me as an ungrateful, reckless fool who threw away a fortune, and a small, quiet few who secretly admired my resolve but were too afraid of my father's wrath to speak up. Clara, of course, was my rock. She let me stay in her spare room for a week, loaning me enough cash for gas to get out of the state, and into the Amazon-bound flight. The most painful consequence was the total severing of the relationship. My mother sent me one final text message, a short, final sentence, "Do not contact us again. You made your choice. Live with it." My father never called. For a long time, the silence was deafening. It felt like a part of me had been amputated, a core limb that had always been there, no matter how much I despised it. I was truly alone. My immediate focus was survival. I knew I had a plane ticket, a contract, and the best camera equipment I could buy, but that was it. I sold my sedan to a used car dealer for quick cash, enough to buy some necessary gear for the Amazon and a cheap, one-way ticket to Miami to catch my connecting flight. The shame and the pain were immense, but they were quickly replaced by a fierce, driving sense of self-reliance. Every time I felt fear, I remembered the forced smile of Julian Hayes in the cold, betrayal in my father's eyes, and the memory fueled my resolve. They wanted me to fail, to crawl back to them, to admit I was wrong. I vowed, then and there, that I would succeed beyond their wildest imagination, not for their approval, but for my own freedom. I didn't just spend 2 years in the Amazon. I spent 2 years rebuilding myself from the ground up. I traded silk sheets for a hammock, corporate strategy for tracking skills, and the pressure of the boardroom for the real, existential pressure of the jungle. I was often scared, always physically exhausted and sometimes sick, but I was never ever unhappy. My photography flourished. My work documented the devastating effects of deforestation and the fragile beauty of life, fighting to survive. My pictures weren't just pretty. They told a story of urgency and truth. The profound lesson I learned wasn't about photography. It was about the true meaning of wealth and self-respect. My parents had taught me that wealth was defined by assets, bank accounts, property, and power over others. I discovered that true wealth is defined by ownership of your own life. I had traded $50 million for the freedom to wake up every morning and be exactly who I was meant to be, and that I realized was the single greatest transaction of my life. The man who sat at that dinner table was a ghost, a reflection of his parents' desires. The man who emerged from the jungle, sunburnt and scarred, was Noah. Today, 6 years later, I'm not a billionaire, but my work is internationally recognized. My photographs have appeared in National Geographic and have been instrumental in several conservation efforts. I live a simple, fulfilling life, traveling the world and telling stories with my camera. I never reconciled with my parents. I heard through Clara that my father's health declined after Thomas Hayes and Julian began making aggressive, risky moves that ultimately tarnished the Vance name and diminished the firm's prestige. I felt a distant sorrow, but no guilt. They made their choice, and I made mine. If there is a takeaway for anyone watching this, it is this. Do not let the comfort of a life designed by others become your cage. The moment you are asked to trade your soul for safety, for money, or for approval, the cost is already too high. There will be people, often the ones you love most, who will stand in judgment. They will tell you that your passion is a hobby, that your freedom is a waste, and that your path is a mistake. Let them judge. Let them disown you. Let them throw the grand dinner just to watch you fall. Because when you walk away from the table, you don't just leave behind the money. You leave behind the person you were forced to be. And in that brave, solitary walk, you finally, truly discover who you are. The most valuable thing you will ever own is your own damn life. Guard it fiercely.